think everyone who has played a FNAF fan game has a favorite that they defend with their life. But what are some games that come to mind? One Night at Flumpty's is a popular choice for many. This is a respectable answer. The art style and the gameplay are incredibly well made. Another choice could be Tycoon Son's Lumber Co. But I feel like one game is brought up the most, that being The Joy of Creation. The Joy of Creation Reborn was released on April 6, 2016 by Nixon. At the time, Nixon was already pretty popular in the FNAF fandom. Some of his earlier creations consist of Those Nights at Fredbear's and Those Nights at Rachel's. Nixon was having a hard time making FNAF fan games. When he originally was making Those Nights at Fredbear's, the game files got corrupted, and not too long after that, his account got hacked. So understandably, Nixon was pissed off and stressed. So he announced a game called The Joy of Creation, and after only 3 days of development, the demo was completed. And it sucked. But that's okay, because Nixon got feedback and moved on to Those Nights at Rachel's, and people love that game. But Nixon wasn't quite done with The Joy of Creation. He was inspired by the success of Those Nights at Rachel's and wanted to make a ton of new FNAF games. One of those games being The Joy of Creation Reborn. The game released a demo containing 2 nights, the animatronics in these nights being Freddy and Bonnie. This was the first well-made free-roam FNAF game. And before this video, I've never actually played this fan game, so why don't we just jump headfirst into this game. Starting with the main gameplay loop, the game is kind of like Slender. You're given a number of items to find across the map. These items spawn in different places every match, so each game is going to be different. To add to the challenge, there's a time limit. The first 2 nights, you only have a minute to find each item. This time limit can be a very good addition and a very terrible one. I'll get into why later. But let's talk about the night specifically. Let's start with Freddy's night. Out of the 4, this one is definitely the best. The house you run around is the perfect size for a game like this. It's small, but not too small to where it feels suffocating. The items are nicely laid out, and you can learn the map pretty easily. And Freddy just looks beautiful. Nixon used the Wither animatronics and made them even more amazing. When you see Freddy take up most of the hallway, you feel pretty spooked. You would feel a little more scared if it wasn't for the fact that it looks a little goofy running at you. So if I had to give this night a rating, I'd give it a nice 8 out of 10. Anyways, let's move on to Bonnie's night. All the positives I gave Freddy's night are completely discarded. The map isn't necessarily big, but everything looks too gray and ugly. The rooms look exactly the same. Also, I feel like now is a good time to mention that the flashlight in this game moves around like crazy, and it's horrible. And the flashlight does not help the dumpster fire that is Bonnie's night. The only redeeming quality of this night is Bonnie's design. Withered Bonnie looks really cool already, but in this game, he looks even better. So my rating for this night would be 6 out of 10. Bonnie carries this night hard. Anyways, let's move on to Chica's night. Chica's night is actually pretty interesting. The time limit has increased by a lot, and the map is huge. The number of items is increased to 10 as well. So, is the map any good? Meh. It's okay. I do have a few issues though. The map takes place in a forest, so the map doesn't have any notable areas. This results in everything looking the same, so looking for a crazy amount of items can be hard. And the map is very dark, so once again, the flashlight fails at its job. At least Chica looks pretty cool. Not to mention, Chica works differently than Freddy and Bonnie. If you look at Chica, she won't move, but if you look at her for too long, she'll charge at you and kill you. Just for that addition alone, I'll give this night 7 out of 10. Now, let's move on to Foxy's night. Foxy's night takes place in a dark attic, and all my criticisms for Bonnie's night can be applied here. Although Foxy has an interesting gimmick. Foxy will follow you throughout the night at a slow pace, almost like he's stalking you, but when you least expect it, Foxy begins charging at you. To stop this, you must shine your flashlight at him, and I think this gimmick is really good. So I really wish the map was good. The map is tight with a lot of dead ends, so it really ruins the night for me. So I'll give this map a 6.5 out of 10. Anyways, let's move on. In conclusion, I think that The Joy of Creation Reborn is a pretty good game. It was just a beta test of what was to come. A few things drag it down, but I really enjoyed playing it, and I urge everyone watching to play it too. So with that, let's move on to Joy of Creation Story Mode. The Joy of Creation Story Mode is the game that lots of people regard as the best FNAF fan game, so I decided to play it and see what all the hype was about. Keep in mind, this is my first time playing this game. I did watch Corey X Kenshin and Markiplier play it, but I never gave it a chance, so I'm pretty excited to play it. But with all that being said, let's just jump straight in. The game starts with Nick Cawthon returning to his old house, and yes, you heard that right. Nick Cawthon is the fictional son of the creator, Scott Cawthon. In this game, you play as Scott Cawthon and his family. The game focuses on 5 memories of the old family house. But why do you play as Scott and his family? Well, we're gonna have to find out. While Scott and his family are chilling, some man named Michael randomly appears at their house. Being the generous man he is, Scott lets this random dude stay in his house. So after everyone goes to bed for the night, Nick wakes up to the sound of Michael's voice coming from the baby monitor. Michael explains that the evil animatronic nerds are here to to kill him. Michael helps Nick by explaining what the animatronics do. I'm not going to go over the gameplay yet, but I will return to it, and when you beat a night, you unlock a newspaper. Once again, I'll return to the newspapers later in the video. Right now, let's continue down the main story. The next memory is the living room. In the living room, you play as Val Cawthon. Scott expresses his distress over letting some random guy into their house, so Scott decides to check on the kids while Val stays downstairs in the living room. A few seconds later, Michael calls up to Val using a radio or something. Michael tells Val that the animatronic nerds are here for her now, and that she needs to use the TV to keep watch of Freddy and Foxy. Although, the living room has 3 entrances, 2 smaller sized doors and 1 big door. Freddy and Foxy are restricted to the smaller doors, while the rest attack through the back doors. Night 2 was okay. The problem I see with it is the difficulty. Sometimes I had no idea what I was doing, but after you beat Night 2, you get another newspaper. But with that, let's move on to Night 3. In Night 3, you play as Scott Cawthon himself. Scott starts feeling off. He tries to get up, but his head is pounding. Scott looks up to see Freddy watching him. Scott recognizes Freddy and runs away. Scott realizes he's in some sort of void that resembles the hallways of his house. So Scott starts running down these hallways while Freddy chases him. When Scott reaches the office, he finds a flashlight and a note. It's addressed to him by the kids. So Scott sits down and the night begins. The caller in this night isn't actually Michael, it's Scott himself. Scott sounds panicked as he explains the mechanic of this night. But all you need to know is that Freddy is the key to winning. You see, time is frozen, so to progress, you have to deal with Freddy. Every time you deal with Freddy, time ticks slowly up. The more you progress, the more animatronics get introduced. This night, in my opinion, is very hard, like incredibly difficult. It took me a while, but I managed to beat it. But I did have to visit the wiki. Now let's move on to the next night. But before we move on, I just realized how stupid I am. I've been calling them nights when they're actually called the memories, which makes much more sense. The next memory is basement. The memory starts with Scott walking downstairs looking for his kids, but then he gets knocked out by Michael. In this memory, you play as Michael as he fulfills tasks from an unknown entity. This memory has the most free roam and I really like it. Although I do have one gripe with it, and that's the fact that everything in this night feels so slow. If you die, you have to painstakingly watch the cutscene all over again, and the walking speed also feels way too slow. But aside from that, I like the challenge that this night has. I also find it really funny that the main antagonists of this night are endoskeletons. They look super goofy, but I do love their mechanics. But with that, let's move on to the final memory. The memory opens with Scott Cawthon awakening from an unconscious state. Scott hears Michael's voice talking about how Scott needs to die for himself and the animatronics to live on. But Scott releases his inner demons and snaps one of the strap that was holding him down. Then, Scott smashes the radio on the ground. So now Scott needs to survive. In this memory, you must face off against the Creation, a giant amalgamation of all the animatronics, Ignited Golden Freddy, and the weird endoskeletons from the basement. The only way to beat this night is to flash Golden Freddy a ton of times, and when you flash him the final time, you earn that W. A cutscene begins with Scott removing the final arm strap, but it was too late. A fire is burning Scott's house down and Scott isn't gonna make it. So when he hears Michael's voice one last time, Scott begs him to keep his family safe. So Michael takes that shit too literally and disguises himself as Scott Cawthon. And then that's where the game ends. So now let's talk about this game and fairly review it. In my opinion, the story for this game is very good. I like how different it is from other FNAF fan games. The story is executed well and is a nice bonus to the gameplay. Is it perfect? Hell no. But Nixon knew what he was doing. Now let's talk about the gameplay. The gameplay in each memory is different, but most share core gameplay loops. But I feel like something in each memory was missing, and I believe that's the ability to freely walk around. The Joy of Creation's whole identity was free roam, so to push it aside for smaller gameplay settings is a little sad to see. I also don't really like some of the settings. Living room was pretty cool, but nights like office and attic feel redundant. But of course, I can't be too harsh on this game. But now it's time for my rating. I'm gonna give this game a solid 8.5 out of 10. And is it the best FNAF game? I believe at a certain time it was, but now I believe it's in the top 5. I love the Joy of Creation and I will be playing more of it in the future. But with that being said, see you guys in the next video.